We spend so much of our lives trapped in the search for meaning. It's the question that seems to define us as human beings. What is the purpose of all this? Why are we here? From the moment we're old enough to grasp the concept of purpose, we're bombarded with expectations. Religion tells us to serve a higher power, society tells us to achieve success, and culture tells us to find our passion. But what if all of this is wrong? What if the constant obsession with meaning is actually what's holding us back from truly living? What if life doesn't need to mean anything at all? That's not a comforting thought at first. The idea that life might be meaningless can feel like a void opening beneath your feet. But what if that void isn't something to fear? What if it's freedom? What if the absence of meaning is the very thing that allows us to live authentically, without the weight of expectations that don't serve us? Think about how much pressure comes with the idea that your life is supposed to matter in some profound, universal way. You're told to chase big dreams, leave a legacy, and make an impact. But what happens when you don't measure up to those expectations? What happens when you wake up one day and realize that the life you're living isn't some grand, heroic narrative? The pressure to matter, to be extraordinary, can suffocate us. It can make us feel like failures if we're not constantly achieving, constantly striving, constantly proving ourselves. And even when we do succeed, it's never enough. We reach one goal, and the satisfaction fades almost immediately, replaced by the need to chase the next thing. It's an endless cycle, because we've been sold the idea that meaning exists outside of us, that it's something we have to earn or discover. But what if it's not?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
What if the idea of a fixed, universal meaning is just a story we've been told? A story designed to keep us striving, to keep us busy, to keep us chasing something we can never actually reach? What if there is no grand narrative, no cosmic purpose for our existence? At first, that thought feels heavy, even terrifying. But now, flip that perspective. If life has no inherent meaning, then nothing is holding you back. You're free, truly free to create your own meaning, or none at all. You're no longer bound by the expectations of religion, society, or culture. You're no longer trapped by the fear of not being enough. Instead, you can live your life exactly as you choose, without having to justify it to anyone, including yourself. That's real freedom. But let's go deeper. Why do we crave meaning so desperately? What is it about the idea of a purpose that keeps us clinging to it, even when it makes us miserable? It's because we're afraid of the alternative. The thought that life might be random, chaotic, and ultimately meaningless terrifies us because it forces us to confront our own insignificance. We want to believe that our struggles, our joys, our achievements, and our pain all add up to something. We want to believe that there's some grand reason for all of it, that we're part of a bigger story. But what if that desire for meaning is just another form of denial? What if it's a way of distracting ourselves from the reality that nothing is guaranteed, that there are no rules, that the universe doesn't owe us anything? And what if we don't need that distraction as much as we think we do? Here's something to think about. If life has no meaning, does that really change anything? Does a sunrise lose its beauty because it doesn't serve a higher purpose? Does love feel any less real if it wasn't preordained by some grand design? Does laughter, friendship, or the taste of your favorite meal become less valuable just because there's no cosmic reason behind it? The truth is, most of the things that make life worth living are valuable simply because they are. They don't need to mean anything. They just need to be experienced. The constant search for meaning often blinds us to the simple, immediate joy of being alive. When we stop trying to force life into some predefined narrative, we can start appreciating it for what it is, not what we think it should be. But here's the thing: letting go of meaning doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean falling into nihilism or apathy. It's the opposite of that. When you stop obsessing over the why of life, you can start focusing on the how. How do you want to live? How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to treat the people around you? When you realize that life has no inherent meaning, you're free to decide what matters to you. Not because someone told you it should matter, but because it genuinely does. That's the real freedom we've been missing: the freedom to live authentically, without the crushing weight of external expectations. You don't need a grand purpose to laugh with friends, to fall in love, to cry when something moves you, or to chase something that excites you. Those things are meaningful because they feel real to you, not because they serve some universal purpose. But let's take this even further. What if the absence of meaning isn't a void to be filled, but a canvas to be painted on? What if it's not something to fear, but something to embrace? When you stop searching for meaning outside of yourself, you start to see that everything you need is already here. You don't need the universe to validate your existence. The simple fact that you're here, alive, breathing, capable of thought and feeling, is enough. You don't need a reason to love, to laugh, to create, or to dream. Those things are their own reasons. And when you let that idea sink in, you begin to realize that life doesn't need a purpose to be valuable. It just needs to be lived. Here's another question: if you weren't afraid of wasting your life, what would you do? If you weren't afraid of failing, of being judged, of not living up to some invisible standard, how would you live? When you let go of the idea that your life needs to mean something, you let go of that fear. You stop worrying about whether your actions are important enough and start focusing on whether they're true to you. Because the truth is, meaning isn't something you find. It's something you create. And if life is meaningless, that means you get to decide what matters. That's not a curse, that's a gift. But here's the hard part: letting go of meaning isn't easy. It's terrifying at first. It forces you to confront the possibility that everything you've been told about life might be wrong. It forces you to take responsibility for your own existence, to stop blaming society or fate or the universe for your unhappiness. And that kind of accountability is scary because it leaves no room for excuses, no one else to blame. But accountability is also liberating. When you stop looking for meaning outside of yourself, you stop being a victim of circumstances you can't control. You realize that the only person who can define your life is you. So what would happen if you stopped searching? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to make it matter and started living it instead? What if, instead of trying to fit your life into some grand narrative, you focused on the things that bring you joy, fulfillment, and connection? The freedom we need isn't freedom from responsibility. It's freedom from the illusion that our lives have to fit some cosmic plan to be valuable. It's the freedom to let go of the stories we've been told and start creating our own. When we give up on the idea that life has some grand, universal meaning, something incredible happens. At first, it might feel like a loss, as if the foundation beneath your feet has crumbled. But as the dust clears, you begin to see that what you've really lost is the pressure to be anything other than what you already are. The need to constantly prove yourself, to measure up to some invisible standard, to tie every decision and experience to a greater purpose. Those things fall away. And what's left is something far more valuable: life itself, stripped of all the noise. Without the weight of meaning hanging over your head, you can finally start paying attention to what's right in front of you. You can start living instead of analyzing, experiencing instead of justifying, being instead of becoming. Think about how much of your time is spent chasing something that doesn't even exist. We tell ourselves that we'll be happy once we find our purpose, achieve our goals, or make our mark on the world. But the finish line keeps moving. You reach one goal, and there's another waiting right behind it. You accomplish one thing, and it doesn't feel like enough. That's because the search for meaning is a game you can't win. It's like running on a treadmill. You pour all your energy into moving forward, but you never really get anywhere. And the worst part is, while you're chasing meaning, you're missing life. You're missing life. You're missing the small, quiet moments that don't need a purpose to be beautiful. You're missing the joy of simply existing, of feeling the sun on your skin, of laughing with a friend, of doing something just because it makes you happy. When you let go of the idea that life has to mean something, you stop running. You step off the treadmill, and for the first time, you're free to just be. But here's the thing: letting go of meaning doesn't mean giving up on the things you care about. It doesn't mean abandoning your goals or passions. In fact, it's the opposite. When you stop trying to force your life into some predefined narrative, you can finally focus on what truly matters to you, not because it fits into a grand plan, but because it feels real. You don't need the universe to validate your choices. You don't need your actions to be part of some greater story. You can simply do what feels right for you in this moment without worrying about whether it's important enough. And that's where true freedom lies, not in finding meaning, but in realizing you don't need it. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that there's no cosmic scorecard keeping track of your successes and failures. No higher power judging whether you're living the right way. No universal purpose you're supposed to fulfill. At first, that might feel overwhelming. But then you realize what it means: you're free. Free to define what matters to you. Free to make mistakes without fear of ruining some grand plan. Free to live your life on your own terms without the constant pressure to justify your existence. That kind of freedom is rare because we've been conditioned to believe that meaning gives life value. But what if meaning is just a distraction? What if it's the thing keeping us from seeing that life is already valuable, just as it is? Letting go of meaning also forces you to confront something most of us spend our lives avoiding: responsibility. If life has no inherent purpose, then no one else can tell you how to live. There's no script to follow, no rules to obey, no path you're supposed to walk. That sounds liberating, but it's also terrifying. It means you can't blame anyone else for your choices. You can't point to society, religion, or fate and say, "This is why I did it." You have to take full ownership of your life. And that's hard because it leaves no room for excuses. But it's also the most empowering thing you'll ever do. When you stop searching for meaning, you stop waiting for permission. You realize that the only person who can decide what your life should look like is you. But let's be honest, this kind of freedom isn't for everyone. Most people aren't ready to let go of meaning because meaning provides comfort. It gives us a sense of order, a sense of control, a sense that the chaos of existence has some kind of structure. Without it, we're forced to face the fact that life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. We're forced to admit that the universe doesn't care about us, that there's no grand plan, no destiny, no guarantees. And that's scary. But it's also the truth. And the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always better than living a lie. So here's the question: what would your life look like if you weren't trying to make it meaningful? What would you do if you weren't afraid of wasting your time, of failing, of not being enough? When you let go of the idea that your life needs to mean something, you let go of that fear. You stop worrying about whether your choices are right or important and start focusing on whether they're true to you. You stop trying to live up to other people's expectations and start living in a way that feels authentic. And that's where real happiness comes from, not from achieving some grand purpose, but from being honest with yourself about what you want and who you are. But this isn't just about personal freedom. Letting go of meaning can also change the way we interact with others. When we stop trying to impose our own idea of meaning onto the world, we become more open, more compassionate, more understanding. We stop judging people based on whether their lives fit into our narrative and start accepting them for who they are. We realize that everyone is just trying to make sense of this chaotic, beautiful, meaningless existence in their own way. And that's okay. We don't have to agree with their choices. We don't have to share their values. We just have to respect their right to live as they choose, just as we want that same respect for ourselves. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice. A choice to keep chasing meaning, to keep running on the treadmill, to keep trying to fit our lives into a story that doesn't exist, or to stop. To let go of the idea that life has to mean something and start living it instead. That choice isn't easy. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truth that everything we've been taught about purpose might be wrong. But it's also the most liberating choice you'll ever make. Because once you let go of meaning, you're free. Free to live, free to love, free to make mistakes, free to be imperfect, free to be human. And isn't that enough? When you let go of meaning, something remarkable starts to happen. Life becomes lighter. The weight of expectations, the constant need to prove your worth, to yourself or to others, begins to fade. You stop seeing your days as part of some grand narrative and start experiencing them for what they really are, a series of moments, each one unique, fleeting, and entirely yours. And when you realize that meaning is not something you have to chase, life starts to feel less like a race and more like an open field. You are no longer bound by the fear of wasting your life because there's nothing to waste. There's no cosmic scoreboard keeping track of whether you're doing enough, achieving enough, or becoming enough. There's just you, living your life, moment by moment, however you choose to live it. Letting go of meaning doesn't mean losing direction, it means creating your own. It means deciding what matters to you, not because you're trying to fit into some larger plan, but because it feels real and meaningful in its own right. Maybe you love painting, even though you'll never sell a single piece. Maybe you find joy in taking long walks with no destination. Maybe you want to spend your time helping people, not because it's part of some moral obligation, but because it's what makes you feel connected. These things don't need to tie into some grand purpose to be valuable. They're valuable because they're yours. And when you stop asking, "What does this mean?" and start asking, "Does this feel right for me?" you begin to live in a way that's truly authentic. But this kind of authenticity takes courage because it means stepping away from the rules and expectations that have been drilled into us. We're told that certain things are more meaningful than others, that some paths are more valid or important. Careers that change the world, relationships that fit a cultural ideal, achievements that leave a legacy, these are the things we're told to strive for. But when you let go of meaning, you see those expectations for what they are: arbitrary. Just because society says something is meaningful doesn't mean it has to be meaningful to you. And when you stop living according to someone else's definition of success, you give yourself permission to define it for yourself. You stop feeling like you're falling behind because there is no race. You stop feeling like you're not enough because you realize there's no standard to measure yourself against. This kind of freedom is uncomfortable at first. When you grow up being told that life needs to mean something, it's hard to let go of that idea. It feels like stepping into the unknown, like losing your footing. But the unknown isn't as scary as we make it out to be. It's where life actually happens. When you're no longer tied to a specific story or purpose, you're free to try things, to experiment, to fail, and to start again without the fear of getting it wrong, because there is no wrong. There's just life, unfolding in ways you can't predict, and that's what makes it beautiful. You don't need to know where you're going to enjoy the ride. You don't need to have a destination to appreciate the view. Letting go of meaning also makes space for gratitude. When you're no longer focused on whether your life is adding up to something, you start noticing the small, simple things you used to overlook. The way sunlight filters through the trees, the sound of rain against a window, the feeling of laughter bubbling up in your chest. These moments don't need to mean anything to be valuable. They just are. And when you stop searching for meaning, you start to see how much of life's beauty exists in the things we often take for granted. Gratitude becomes your natural state, not because you've achieved some grand purpose, but because you're fully present in your life as it is, not as you think it should be. Letting go of meaning also changes the way we deal with pain. When we believe that life has a purpose, we often try to frame our suffering as part of a bigger picture. We tell ourselves that everything happens for a reason, that our struggles are leading us somewhere, that our pain is teaching us a lesson. But what if it's not? What if bad things happen for no reason at all? That thought can feel devastating, but it can also be freeing. If suffering has no meaning, then it doesn't need to be justified. You don't have to find a reason for it. You don't have to turn it into a lesson or a stepping stone. You can simply accept it for what it is, part of the human experience. And when you stop trying to make sense of your pain, you give yourself permission to feel it, to grieve, to heal, and to move forward without carrying the extra burden of needing it to mean something. This shift in perspective also changes the way we approach death. The search for meaning is, at its core, a way of coping with mortality. We want to believe that our lives matter, that we'll leave something behind, that will be remembered. But the truth is, most of us won't be. In a few generations, very few people will know our names, let alone the details of our lives. And that's okay. When you let go of the need for meaning, you stop seeing death as something to fear and start seeing it as part of the same randomness that makes life so precious. The fact that life is temporary doesn't make it less valuable, it makes it more so. If life is meaningless, then every moment you get to be alive is a gift, not because it's leading to something, but because it's happening at all. But perhaps the most profound thing about letting go of meaning is the way it connects us to others. When you stop looking for meaning, you stop seeing people as characters in some larger story, and you start seeing them as they are flawed, messy, complicated human beings trying to make sense of the same chaos you are. You realize that everyone is just doing their best with what they have, and that creates space for empathy. You don't need to agree with someone's choices or share their beliefs to respect their right to live as they choose. And when you let go of meaning, you let go of the need to judge, to compare, to compete. Instead, you find connection in the shared experience of simply being alive. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with life, not the life we've been told to live, but the life that's actually in front of us. When you stop searching for meaning, you start noticing all the ways life surprises you, all the ways it defies your expectations, all the ways it refuses to fit into a tidy narrative. And that's the point. Life doesn't need meaning to be beautiful. It doesn't need a purpose to be worth living. It just is. And that's enough. So instead of asking what your life means, maybe the better question is, what do you want it to feel like? Because in the end, that's the only thing that really matters.